My true story from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. When my daughter got married, I kept quiet about the $23 million I inherited from my late husband. That decision nearly cost me everything, but it also gave me the greatest victory of my life. They seated me at table 9, practically in the kitchen, while my new son-in-law's family sat at the head table like visiting royalty. I watched my own daughter apologize to her new mother-in-law for the modest gift I'd brought, a simple pearl necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. Patricia Whitmore accepted my daughter's apology with a kind of smile that never reached her eyes. Her perfectly manicured fingers barely touching the jewelry box before setting it aside like it was something she'd rather not handle. She tilted her head with that practiced expression wealthy women use when they want to appear gracious while making it crystal clear that they're doing you a tremendous favor. Her shoulders remained rigid, her back perfectly straight, as if relaxing even slightly might contaminate her with our family's obvious lack of refinement. When she spoke, her voice carried that particular tone of forced politeness, the kind that sounds sweet but feels like ice water, telling Sarah not to worry about it, that it's the thought that counts, dear. But it was her eyes that told the real story. Those cold blue eyes swept over the pearl necklace with the same expression you'd give a gas station trinket, then flicked toward me with a look that said she'd already calculated my net worth down to the penny and found it disappointingly small. She patted Sarah's hand with the kind of mechanical affection you'd give a child who'd brought you a drawing that wasn't quite good enough for the refrigerator. What they didn't know was that those pearls were worth more than most people's houses, and the woman in the plain red dress and simple black shoes was sitting on enough money to buy their entire country club. Welcome back to Granny Dorothy's Stories. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Your support truly encourages me to continue sharing these incredible tales with you. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing from my sweethearts around the world. My name is Catherine Wells, I'm 71 years old. For the past 4 years, since my husband Frank passed away, I've been playing the role of the struggling widow living on a teacher's pension. I shop with coupons, drive a 12-year-old Honda, and wear the same 3 church dresses in rotation. Everyone in my life, including my own daughter Sarah, believes I'm just getting by on Social Security and the small life insurance policy Frank left behind. But Frank Wells was far more clever than anyone ever imagined. For 42 years of marriage, while I was teaching 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary and raising our daughter, Frank was quietly building one of the most successful investment portfolios in Western Pennsylvania. He bought rental properties when they were cheap, invested in stocks that everyone else overlooked, and saved every penny we didn't absolutely need to spend. The morning Frank died, I thought I was about to become one of those widows who loses her house and has to move in with her children. Instead, I discovered that my husband had left me $23 million, all of it carefully protected in trusts and investment accounts that would generate more money every month than I used to earn in a year teaching school. Frank had written me a letter, sealed in an envelope with my name on it, tucked into his desk drawer where he knew I'd find it when I was settling his affairs. In that letter, he explained why he'd never told me about the money while he was alive, and why I should continue keeping it secret even after he was gone. Catherine, the letter said in Frank's careful handwriting, I lived modestly so we could die wealthy, and I kept our wealth hidden so you'd be safe from people who would try to take advantage of a grieving widow. Rich people who look rich become targets. Rich people who look poor stay rich and stay safe. Don't let anyone know what you really have until you absolutely have to defend yourself. 4 years later, sitting at that wedding reception watching my daughter's new husband calculate whether her poor mother might be worth manipulating, I finally understood what Frank had been protecting me from. What Patricia Whitmore and her precious son didn't realize was that in exactly 2 weeks, I'd be sitting across from him at dinner, watching his face go white as he discovered that the helpless widow he was planning to rob had enough money to destroy his entire world. That conversation was about to become the most expensive mistake of his life. The wedding itself was beautiful, I'll give them that. Sarah looked radiant in her grandmother's lace dress, the one beautiful thing our family had managed to preserve through the generations. But from the moment Jaden Whitmore's family arrived at the church, the social hierarchy became crystal clear. His parents, Robert and Patricia Whitmore, swept in like they were attending a royal coronation. Patricia wore enough diamonds to fund a small country, And Robert had that particular arrogance that comes from inherited wealth and the assumption that everyone else should be grateful for their presence. They greeted the important guests with warm embraces and the less important ones with polite nods, and they looked right through me like I was part of the furniture. During the cocktail hour, I watched Jayden work the room with the precision of a seasoned politician. He had different expressions for different people. Genuine warmth for anyone who obviously had money, professional courtesy for those who might be useful to him, and barely concealed indifference for anyone who looked like they might need favors instead of offering opportunities. When he finally approached me, armed with his most patronizing smile, I knew exactly what was coming. "Mrs. Wells," he said, taking my hand like he was greeting visiting royalty. "Isn't this just magical? You must be so proud of Sarah." "Oh, I'm absolutely overwhelmed with maternal joy," I replied, my voice sweet as sugar. "Though I have to say, the view from back here is quite educational." He either missed the sarcasm in my voice or chose to ignore it, the way politicians do when they're working a crowd. "I've been looking forward to getting to know you better," he continued. "Sarah speaks about you so fondly, and I think it's important for families to really understand each other." "How refreshing," I said. "Most people usually manage that before they marry into the family, but I do admire your commitment to handling things in reverse order." That earned me the smallest flicker in his smile, barely noticeable unless you were watching for it. But I caught it, the way you catch the first sign of a storm brewing on the horizon. "I was thinking we should have dinner soon, just the two of us," he said. "I have some ideas about how we might collaborate as a family, ways I might be able to help you navigate some of the challenges that come with, well, being on your own at your stage of life. The challenges that come with being on my own." As if being a 71-year-old woman automatically made me helpless and confused. "That sounds delightful," I said, fanning myself with my napkin. "I can hardly wait to hear about these challenges I didn't know I was having." As Jayden moved on to charm other guests, I caught my reflection in the mirror across the reception hall. There I was, Catherine Wells, looking exactly like what everyone expected to see. An elderly woman in a plain red dress, sitting alone at the cheap seats, probably worried about how she was going to pay her heating bill this winter. But what nobody in that room knew, what even my own daughter didn't suspect, was that the modest widow in the simple pearls had enough money hidden away to buy and sell every person at that reception 3 times over. Because what Jayden Whitmore was about to discover was that some people's biggest mistake is assuming they know what someone else is worth. He saw a lonely old woman who probably clipped coupons and counted pennies. What he was actually looking at was a multimillionaire who had been taught by her husband to stay invisible until the moment she needed to strike back. For those of you who are new here, welcome to our community of people who refuse to be victims. The stories I share prove that wisdom and determination never go out of style, no matter what age you are. The week after the wedding, I did what I always did. I went about my normal routine like the modest widow everyone expected me to be. I clipped coupons from the Sunday paper, drove my old Honda to the grocery store, and bought the store brand cereal instead of the name brand. But while I was playing this role that had kept me safe for 4 years, I was also thinking about Frank's letter and what he'd warned me about. You see, Frank hadn't just been smart about money. He'd been smart about people. During his 42 years working as a supervisor at the steel mill, he'd seen what happened when word got out that someone had come into money. Suddenly, everyone had investment opportunities, business ventures, and sob stories that required financial assistance. Frank watched good people get taken advantage of by relatives, friends, and complete strangers who could smell money from 3 counties away. That's why, when Frank started making his real money in the stock market and real estate, he never told a soul, not even me. While I was teaching 3rd grade and thinking we were just getting by on his mill salary and my teacher's pay, Frank was quietly buying rental properties in neighborhoods that he knew would improve over time. He was investing in companies that made boring but necessary products. Things like plumbing supplies and electrical components that people would always need no matter what the economy was doing. Frank had a rule about investing that he wrote about in his letter. He said, "Catherine, I never bought anything that I couldn't explain to a 3rd grader in 2 sentences. If it was too complicated for my wife to understand, it was too risky for my money. That's how Frank thought about everything. Simple, practical, and always with an eye toward protecting what he'd built. The rental properties were scattered across 3 different counties, all of them modest houses in working-class neighborhoods where people took care of their homes and paid their rent on time. Frank never bought the fanciest house on the block or the cheapest one either. He bought the solid, dependable ones that would attract solid, dependable tenants. Over 20 years, those properties had tripled in value, and the rental income alone was enough to support me comfortably for the rest of my life. But the real surprise was Frank's stock portfolio. Every month for 30 years, Frank had taken a portion of his paycheck and bought shares in companies that most people had never heard of but that made products everyone used every day. Companies that manufactured the little plastic pieces that go inside washing machines, or the metal fasteners that hold car engines together, or the specialized glass that goes in hospital equipment. Frank used to say, "Catherine, glamorous investments make glamorous losses. Boring investments make boring profits. And boring profits compound into exciting wealth." He was absolutely right. Those boring companies had paid steady dividends year after year, and Frank had reinvested every penny of those dividends back into more shares. By the time Frank died, his stock portfolio alone was worth $12 million. The rental properties were worth another $8 million. And he'd put aside $3 million in bonds and certificates of deposit as what he called sleep-well-at-night money. Investments so safe and predictable that I'd never have to worry about losing them even if the stock market crashed. $23 million, all of it legally mine. All of it generating enough income that I could live like a queen if I wanted to. But Frank's letter had been very clear about why I shouldn't want to. The moment people knew I had money, I'd become a target for every scheme, scam, and sob story in western Pennsylvania. Frank had seen it happen to other people at the mill who'd won settlements from workplace accidents or inherited money from relatives. Suddenly they had second cousins they'd never met asking for loans, investment advisors calling them every day with can't-miss opportunities, and family members who'd barely spoken to them for years becoming very interested in their welfare. "The vultures start circling the moment they smell money," Frank had written. "Stay invisible until you have to defend yourself. And when you do have to defend yourself, use every penny if necessary to destroy whoever tries to steal from you." Now, sitting in my simple kitchen 4 years after Frank's death, I was beginning to understand that the defense Frank had prepared me for was about to begin. If stories like this resonate with you, there are more where this came from. I believe in sharing real experiences that show how ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to accept disrespect. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was watering my small garden behind the house. Sarah's voice sounded different somehow, more nervous than usual. "Mom, Jaden was wondering if you'd like to have dinner with us this weekend. Just the 3 of us somewhere nice. He said he's been thinking about family and how important it is for everyone to feel included. Family and inclusion. How thoughtful of him to be concerned about my feelings after seating me behind the floral arrangements at his wedding. That sounds lovely, sweetheart. Where were you thinking?" "Actually, Jaden suggested just him and you. He said he wants to get to know his new mother-in-law properly, and he thought it might be easier to have a real conversation without me there as a distraction." A real conversation. Just the 2 of us. Exactly what Frank's letter had warned me about. Well, isn't that sweet of him? Where did he want to go? That new steakhouse downtown, the expensive one. He said he wanted to take you somewhere special. The expensive one. Where everyone would see the successful young man treating his elderly mother-in-law to a nice dinner. What a thoughtful son-in-law he was. Tell Jaden I'd be delighted. Friday evening would be perfect. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about Frank's letter and the war chest he'd left me. If Jaden Whitmore wanted to play games with a widow he thought was helpless, it was time to teach him that some widows come with more ammunition than he could possibly imagine. The first thing I did was call the law firm that had handled Frank's estate. Margaret Fitzgerald had been Frank's attorney for 15 years, and she was the only person besides my banker who knew the true extent of what Frank had left me. "Margaret, it's Catherine Wells. I think I'm about to need your help with something Frank warned me about." "What kind of help, Catherine?" The kind where someone is going to try to take advantage of what they think is a helpless widow, and I need to be prepared to fight back. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Who are we talking about? My new son-in-law. He wants to have a private dinner to discuss my situation, and how he might be able to help me with the challenges of being on my own. Catherine, that's exactly the scenario Frank was worried about. Do you want me to recommend someone who can help you document whatever he's planning? I want you to recommend someone who can help me destroy him if he tries to steal from me. Margaret gave me the name of a private investigator named Thomas Bradley who specialized in financial fraud cases. She also referred me to a security consultant who could help me record conversations if I needed evidence for criminal charges. Catherine, Frank left you enough money to hire the best legal team in Pennsylvania if you need to fight this. Don't let anyone intimidate you or rush you into signing anything. Margaret, after 42 years of marriage to Frank Wells, I know better than to sign anything without reading it first. And after 4 years of playing the helpless widow, I'm looking forward to reminding someone that helpless and poor are two very different things. Join our family of viewers who believe that preparation and wisdom can overcome any challenge. What you're about to hear proves that the best defense is sometimes a devastating offense. I called Thomas Bradley that afternoon. His voice was calm and professional, with just a hint of steel underneath that told me he was someone who'd dealt with predators before. Mrs. Wells, tell me about your son-in-law's approach. I explained about the wedding seating, the conversation about challenges, and the invitation to dinner. Classic pattern, Thomas said. Family connection to establish trust, assessment of the target's apparent vulnerability, then a private meeting to begin the manipulation process. How much does he think you're worth? He thinks I'm living on Social Security and a small teacher's pension. Maybe 50 or 60,000 in savings if I'm lucky. And the reality? 23 million, completely protected in trusts, he can't touch even if he manages to manipulate me into signing papers. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Wells, I think your son-in-law is about to make a very expensive mistake. How far are you willing to go to stop him? As far as necessary. My husband spent 40 years building that wealth, and he specifically prepared me to defend it from people exactly like Jaden Whitmore. Then let's prepare you for war. Thomas Bradley worked fast. Within 3 days, he had a complete background report on Jaden Whitmore that explained everything I needed to know about why my new son-in-law was suddenly so interested in his elderly mother-in-law's welfare. Jaden owed $47,000 in gambling debts to people who weren't patient about collecting what they were owed. His credit cards were maxed out, his student loans were in default, and he'd been borrowing money from friends and family for months. The expensive lifestyle he'd been showing off to Sarah was built entirely on debt and false promises. But the most interesting part of Thomas's report was Jaden's history with elderly relatives. 2 years earlier, he'd convinced his grandmother to sign over power of attorney so he could help her manage her finances. Within 6 months, he'd drained her savings account and used her house as collateral for loans he couldn't repay. The family had covered up the theft to avoid scandal, but Jaden's grandmother had died in a state-funded nursing home while Jaden kept her house. Mrs. Wells, Thomas told me over the phone, your son-in-law isn't just desperate for money. He's a professional predator who targets elderly women in his own family. He's done this before, and he's planning to do it again with you. What happened to his grandmother? She died believing her family had abandoned her. She never understood that her grandson had stolen everything she'd worked for. If you've ever felt pure rage mixed with absolute determination, you'll understand what was building inside me as I listened to Thomas describe what Jaden had done to his own grandmother. This wasn't just about protecting my money anymore. This was about making sure no other elderly woman would ever suffer what Jaden's grandmother had endured. Thomas, I want you to document everything he does and says at our dinner. I want evidence that will stand up in court when we prosecute him. Prosecute him for what? He hasn't committed a crime yet. He will. And when he does, I want him to spend the next 20 years in prison thinking about his grandmother. The security consultant, a woman named Linda Morrison, came to my house the day before my dinner with Jaden. She showed me how to use a recording device that looked like a simple piece of jewelry, how to position myself to get the best audio quality, and how to ask questions that would get Jaden to reveal his true intentions. Mrs. Wells, the key is to let him think he's winning. Let him believe you're confused and grateful for his help. The more confident he gets, the more he'll reveal what he's really planning. I've been playing confused and grateful for 4 years. I think I can manage one more performance. This isn't just a performance anymore. This is evidence gathering for a criminal case. Everything he says could be used to send him to prison. Good. That's exactly where he belongs. For anyone just discovering these stories, you're witnessing what happens when preparation meets opportunity. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. Friday evening arrived with all the anticipation of Christmas morning. I dressed carefully for my role. A simple blue dress that said, "Modest Widow," my grandmother's small pearl earrings, and shoes that were practical rather than fashionable. I wanted to look exactly like what Jaden expected to see. An elderly woman who was grateful for any attention and easily impressed by expensive restaurants. The steakhouse was exactly the kind of place designed to intimidate people who weren't used to $20 appetizers and wine lists that read like mortgage payments. Jaden was already seated when I arrived, wearing his most trustworthy smile and a suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Catherine, you look wonderful. I'm so glad we could do this." "Thank you, dear. This place certainly is impressive. I don't think I've been somewhere this fancy since Frank and I celebrated our 25th anniversary." He ordered wine without asking what I preferred, and I let him, playing the role of the elderly woman who was grateful someone else was making the decisions. The wine probably cost more than I pretended to spend on groceries in a month. "So, Catherine, how are you really doing? I know it must be difficult, managing everything on your own." "Oh, I get by. It's not always easy, but I manage." "I'm sure you do your best, but there are so many complicated decisions these days. Financial planning, investment choices, legal issues. It's overwhelming even for people who work in those fields." Financial planning. There was right on schedule. I suppose it can be confusing. Frank always handled those things when he was alive. Exactly. And now you're having to figure it all out by yourself. That's not fair to you. Not fair to me. How considerate of him to be concerned about fairness. I try to be careful with what little I have. Frank always said to live within your means. Of course. But Catherine, being too careful can be just as dangerous as being too risky. You need someone with experience to help you make sure you're not missing opportunities or making mistakes that could hurt you later. Someone with experience. Someone like him, presumably. What kind of mistakes? Well, for instance, are you sure your savings are in the right type of accounts? Are you getting the best interest rates? Do you have proper legal protections in case something happens to you? Legal protections. We were getting to the real topic now. I think everything is in order, but I suppose I don't really know what I don't know. That's exactly the problem. And Catherine, I have to be honest with you. I'm worried about you being alone in that house. What if you had a medical emergency? What if someone tried to take advantage of you? What if you needed help making important decisions? What if someone tried to take advantage of me? The irony was so perfect I almost laughed. I never really thought about those things. You should think about them. Sarah and I have been discussing it, and we both feel like you need some kind of protection, some safeguards in place. Sarah and I have been discussing it. My own daughter was being used as part of his manipulation. What kind of safeguards? Jaden reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder, just like Frank's letter had predicted someone would do. Just some basic paperwork. Nothing dramatic. It would give Sarah and me the ability to help you if you ever needed assistance making financial or medical decisions. He spread the documents across the table like he was showing me vacation photos. Power of attorney forms, financial management agreements, and medical decision-making authorizations. This looks very official. It is official. My lawyer prepared these specifically for your situation. They're designed to protect you while giving your family the ability to help when necessary. His lawyer. His situation. His ability to help himself to my money. I don't know, Jayden. This seems like a lot to think about. Catherine, I understand your hesitation, but these things really work best when they're handled promptly. The longer you wait, the more complicated it becomes. And frankly, there could be questions about your capacity to make these decisions if you delay too long. Questions about my capacity. He was already threatening to have me declared incompetent if I didn't cooperate. What kind of questions? Well, you're 71 years old, living alone, managing complex financial decisions without professional guidance. If something happened and these protections weren't in place, there could be legal challenges, delays, complications that would make everything much harder for everyone involved. Legal challenges, delays, complications. All problems that would mysteriously disappear if I just signed away my rights to him. I see. The good news is that this can all be resolved tonight. I brought a notary, she's waiting outside. We could have everything finalized in 15 minutes, and then you'd never have to worry about these issues again. A notary waiting outside. Just like Frank had predicted. Jayden was so confident in his manipulation that he'd already arranged for the papers to be signed tonight. Jayden, can I ask you something? Of course. How did you know I needed help with these things? I mean, what made you think I was having problems managing my affairs? For just a moment, his confident expression flickered. Well, it's just common sense. Elderly people living alone always face these challenges. But something specific must have made you think I needed help right now. Did someone say something? Did Sarah mention that I was having difficulties? No, nothing like that. I just think it's smart to be proactive about these things. Proactive. How thoughtful of you to be so concerned about my welfare. Catherine, I hope you understand that this comes from a place of love and concern. Sarah and I just want to make sure you're protected. Protected from everyone except him. I'm sure you do. But Jayden, can I tell you something that might surprise you? What's that? I smiled sweetly and leaned forward, my voice dropping to almost a whisper. I know exactly what you're trying to do, and it's not going to work. If you want to hear more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when they refuse to be victims, you know what to do. This community believes that justice isn't just for the young and powerful. The color drained from his face like someone had pulled a plug. I don't know what you mean. I know about your gambling debts. I know about your credit cards. I know about what you did to your grandmother. And I know that you think I'm a helpless widow with a modest savings account that you can steal. Jayden's hands were shaking now. Catherine, I think you're confused. I'm not confused at all. I'm also not poor. The woman you're trying to rob has $23 million, all of it legally protected in ways that would take you years to understand and forever to access. That's impossible. Is it? Frank Wells wasn't just a mill worker, Jayden. He was one of the smartest investors in Pennsylvania. And he warned me about people exactly like you. You can't prove anything. Actually, I can prove everything. This entire conversation has been recorded. The private investigator I hired has documented your background and your previous crimes. The attorney I've retained specializes in prosecuting elder fraud. And the $23 million I mentioned. That's my war chest for destroying anyone who tries to steal from me. Jayden stared at me across the table like he was seeing me for the first time. You don't understand. I'm desperate. You need to leave this restaurant, leave my family alone, and pray that I don't decide to prosecute you just for what you've attempted tonight. Catherine, please. We can work something out. The only thing we're working out is whether you disappear quietly or whether I spend some of my money making sure you disappear loudly. Jayden gathered his papers with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. His perfect plan was crumbling around him like a house of cards in a windstorm. This isn't over. Yes, it is. And if you ever come near me or my family again, you'll discover just how expensive it can be to threaten someone with unlimited resources and nothing left to lose. As Jayden stumbled out of the restaurant, I finished my wine and thought about Frank's letter. He'd been absolutely right about everything. The vultures had come circling, just like he'd predicted. But he'd also been right about something else. When you have to defend yourself, use every penny if necessary to destroy whoever tries to steal from you. The war Frank had prepared me for was just beginning, but the first battle was already won. I paid for dinner with my credit card, the one connected to an account that earned more interest in a month than Jayden made in a year. Then I drove my old Honda home to my modest house, where I would spend the evening planning the complete destruction of a predator who'd made the mistake of hunting the wrong widow. Frank had left me more than money. He'd left me weapons. And tomorrow I was going to start using them. What you just witnessed is what happens when someone mistakes kindness for weakness. If these real stories of people standing up for themselves inspire you, there are many more where this came from. Kindly subscribe for more. The next morning, I called Thomas Bradley with news that made his day considerably more interesting. Thomas, Jayden took the bait completely. I have him on record attempting to defraud me, threatening to have me declared incompetent, and admitting that he brought a notary to force me to sign documents tonight. Mrs. Wells, that's enough evidence for criminal charges. Elder fraud, attempted theft, conspiracy. He's looking at serious prison time. Good. What's our next step? We turn the evidence over to the district attorney's office. But Catherine, are you sure you want to go through with this? He is your daughter's husband. Thomas, that man stole his own grandmother's life savings and let her die in poverty. If I don't stop him, he'll do the same thing to other elderly women. Family or not, he belongs in prison. Then let's put him there. The criminal case moved quickly once the authorities had the recording and Thomas's background investigation. Within a week, Jayden was arrested at his office on charges of attempted elder fraud and financial abuse. The local newspaper ran the story on the front page. Local man arrested for trying to defraud elderly mother-in-law. Sarah called me, crying, the day after Jayden's arrest. Mom, I don't understand what's happening. Jayden said you misunderstood his intentions, that he was just trying to help you. Sweetheart, come over for dinner tonight. There are some things about your husband and about our family that you need to know. That evening, I showed Sarah the recording of my dinner with Jayden. I showed her Thomas's investigation report detailing what Jayden had done to his grandmother. And then I showed her Frank's letter and the financial statements that proved what she'd never known about her parents' true wealth. Mom, $23 million. Dad left you $23 million. Your father was smarter than any of us realized. And he warned me that people would try to take advantage of me if they knew about the money. But Jayden is my husband. He wouldn't. Sarah, your husband drained his grandmother's savings account and used her house as collateral for his gambling debts. She died in a state nursing home while he lived in her house. Sarah stared at the documents spread across my kitchen table, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. What am I supposed to do now? Whatever you want. But you'll do it with complete information instead of lies and manipulation. I can't stay married to someone who tried to rob my mother. Then don't. Sarah filed for divorce the next week, citing irreconcilable differences and fraudulent concealment of debts. She moved back into her old room in my house while she figured out her next steps, and we spent long evenings talking about money, family, and the difference between love and manipulation. The trial was scheduled for 6 months later, but Jayden's lawyer recommended that he accept a plea deal rather than face a jury with the evidence we had against him. Jayden pleaded guilty to attempted elder fraud and received a sentence of 8 years in prison plus restitution for the costs of his prosecution. But the most satisfying part of Jayden's destruction wasn't his prison sentence. It was what happened when the story of his arrest became public knowledge. Other elderly victims came forward. Women he'd targeted in previous cities, elderly relatives who'd been too ashamed to report his thefts, families who'd covered up his crimes to avoid scandal. The FBI opened an investigation into what they discovered was a multi-state pattern of elder abuse. Jayden's cooperation with that investigation might reduce his sentence slightly, but it would also expose every person he'd worked with and every elderly person he'd victimized over the past decade. This community proves that justice isn't just for the young and powerful. If you believe that wisdom and determination never go out of style, you're in the right place. That's when I decided that Frank's $23 million needed a mission that matched its power. I called Margaret Fitzgerald and told her I wanted to establish a foundation dedicated to prosecuting elder fraud and helping victims recover their stolen assets. Catherine, that's a beautiful way to honor Frank's memory. How much were you thinking of dedicating to this? Whatever it takes. $5 million to start, then $1 million a year for operations. More if we need it. Catherine, that's an extraordinary amount of money. Margaret, that predator stole his grandmother's independence and let her die in poverty. If my money can prevent that from happening to even one other elderly person, it's the best investment Frank's legacy could possibly make. The Wells Foundation for Elder Protection opened its doors 6 months after Jayden's sentencing. We provided free legal representation for elderly fraud victims, funded investigations into financial abuse, and trained law enforcement officers to recognize the warning signs of elder exploitation. Within our first year, we'd helped prosecute 17 cases of elder fraud and recovered over $2 million in stolen assets for victims. We'd also created an early warning system that helped banks and financial institutions identify suspicious transactions that might indicate elderly customers were being manipulated. But the most important work we did was education. We traveled to senior centers, churches, and community groups throughout Pennsylvania, teaching elderly people how to recognize manipulation, how to protect their assets, and how to fight back against anyone who tried to take advantage of them. During one of those presentations, an elderly woman in the back row raised her hand and asked, "What if the person trying to steal from you is your own family member?" "Then you do what I did," I told her. "You use every resource you have to stop them. Blood doesn't excuse theft. And family doesn't mean you have to let someone destroy your independence." 2 years after Jayden's conviction, I was invited to speak at a conference on elder fraud prevention in Washington, D.C. The audience was filled with law enforcement officers, prosecutors, and victim advocates from across the country. "Ladies and gentlemen," I told that audience, "I'm here to tell you something that might surprise you. The best defense against elder fraud isn't more laws or more regulations. It's elderly people who refuse to be victims. Too many people assume that being elderly means being helpless. Too many criminals think that gray hair and wrinkled hands mean easy targets. And too many families think that taking control of an elderly person's finances is somehow protecting them. I'm here to tell you that all of those assumptions are dangerous mistakes. Elderly people built this country, survived wars and depressions, raised families and created wealth through decades of hard work and careful planning. We don't become helpless the moment we collect Social Security. We don't become confused the moment we turn 70. And we certainly don't become fair game for anyone who thinks they can manipulate us. My husband left me $23 million and a letter warning me that people would try to steal it. When my son-in-law attempted to do exactly that, I used every penny necessary to destroy him. Not because I'm vindictive, but because I refuse to let anyone steal what my husband spent 40 years building. The predators who target elderly people are counting on shame, confusion, and isolation to make their crimes successful. They expect us to be too embarrassed to report theft, too confused to understand legal documents, and too isolated to get help when we need it. But here's what they don't expect: elderly people with resources, determination, and absolute fury at being underestimated. They don't expect victims who fight back with private investigators, criminal lawyers, and enough money to pursue justice regardless of the cost. My son-in-law thought he was robbing a helpless widow with a modest savings account. Instead, he discovered that some widows bite back, and some bites are financed by multimillion-dollar war chests. The applause when I finished that speech lasted for 5 minutes. Afterward, dozens of people approached me with their own stories of elder fraud, their own battles against family members who tried to steal from them, their own victories against predators who'd underestimated them. For those who've been with this community for a while, you know that these stories always end with justice. If you're new here, welcome to a place where age means wisdom, not weakness. An elderly gentleman from Texas told me that his nephew had tried to steal his ranch by convincing him to sign it over for tax purposes. Instead of signing, the man had hired a lawyer and discovered that his nephew owed gambling debts to dangerous people and planned to sell the ranch to pay them off. A woman from Ohio described how her daughter-in-law had attempted to gain power of attorney by claiming that living alone was making her confused and forgetful. Instead of giving in, the woman had moved to a senior living community where she was surrounded by people who could verify her mental capacity, and her son had divorced his wife when he learned what she'd attempted. Story after story of elderly people who'd refused to become victims, who'd fought back against manipulation, who'd used their resources and their intelligence to protect what they'd built over a lifetime of work. That night, in my hotel room in Washington, I called Sarah to tell her about the conference. "Mom, I'm so proud of what you've built with the foundation. Dad would be amazed at how you've used his legacy. Your father knew exactly what he was doing when he left me that money and that letter. He was preparing me for a war I didn't even know was coming. And you won that war. We won that war. You chose justice over comfort, truth over lies. That took courage. I learned courage from watching my mother destroy a predator with nothing but intelligence, determination, and a very large bank account. Today, at 75 years old, I can honestly say that I'm exactly who Frank always knew I was. A woman who looks harmless but fights like a wildcat when cornered. The Wells Foundation has grown into a national organization that's helped prosecute hundreds of elder fraud cases and recovered tens of millions of dollars for victims. Jaden Whitmore is serving his sentence in a federal prison, where I'm told he spends most of his time warning other inmates about the dangers of underestimating elderly women with substantial resources and no patience for predators. Sarah has rebuilt her life with hard-won wisdom about the difference between love and manipulation. She's dating a teacher who drives a 10-year-old car and has never once asked about our family finances. And I still live in my modest house, drive my practical car and shop with coupons. Not because I have to, but because Frank taught me that the best protection against predators is staying invisible until the moment you need to strike. But there's one thing that's changed since that wedding where Jaden first decided I was worth targeting. Now, when I sit at family gatherings or community events, I'm not the helpless widow hidden behind the flower arrangements. I'm the woman who used $23 million to declare war on elder fraud and won. People treat me differently now. They listen when I speak. They ask for my advice. They respect my opinions. Not because they know about the money, but because they know I'm someone who refuses to be underestimated. What you've heard today is what happens when preparation meets determination. If these stories of real people refusing to be victims resonate with you, you've found your community. If you're listening to this story and you recognize yourself as someone who's been treated like you don't matter because of your age, I want you to remember something. You are never too old to be dangerous to people who want to hurt you. You are never too vulnerable to fight back. And you are never too helpless to surprise someone who underestimates you. Frank's letter ended with advice that I want to share with every person who's ever been made to feel invisible because of their age. Don't let anyone steal what you've spent a lifetime building. And when someone tries, use every resource you have to make them regret the day they decided to mess with you. That's exactly what I did. And if someone ever tries to steal from you, that's exactly what you should do too. Some lessons are worth every penny they cost to teach. And some victories are worth every dollar they cost to win. If this story gave you the courage to stand up for yourself or someone you love, drop a comment and let me know. Your voice matters, your strength matters, and your refusal to be a victim matters more than you know. Remember, it's not the size of the bank account that makes you dangerous to predators. It's the size of your determination to protect what's yours and the wisdom to know that respect isn't given. It's taken. Thank you for listening to my story. Now go out there and make sure nobody ever mistakes your kindness for weakness again. 2 weeks after that wedding, Jaden showed up at my door with a briefcase full of documents and a plan that would have given him control over what he thought were my modest savings. What he didn't know was that I'd been expecting him, preparing for him, and getting ready to teach him the most expensive lesson of his life. You see, Frank's letter had warned me about people exactly like Jaden. Men who would see a widow living modestly and assume she was helpless. Men who would use family connections to gain trust and then use that trust to steal everything they could get their hands on. Frank had prepared me for this war, armed me for this battle, and given me enough ammunition to destroy anyone who tried to take what belonged to me. But the most beautiful part of Frank's plan wasn't just the money he'd left me. It was the fact that he'd structured everything so perfectly that even if someone managed to trick me into signing away my rights, even if they convinced a court that I was too confused to manage my own affairs, they still couldn't touch a single penny of what he'd built for me. Jaden Whitmore thought he was hunting a helpless widow with a modest nest egg. What he was actually doing was walking straight into a trap that had been 40 years in the making, baited with $23 million and armed with the fury of a woman who'd been underestimated one too many times. That dinner conversation he was so eager to have was going to be very educational indeed. Just not in the way he was expecting. If these stories of real people refusing to be victims resonate with you, you've found your community. Do well to subscribe. Together we prove that wisdom, determination, and courage have no expiration date. Until next time, keep surprising the people who underestimate you.